Thank you for listening to Life Improvement Radio. You are listening to a rebroadcast of a previously recorded show.
We're live from the Miami Book Fair, powered by Life Improvement Radio. My website's tooltutor.net for more information. Twitter, Tooltutor, Neil S. Haley, Facebook, LinkedIn, Neil Haley, Instagram, Tooltutor, Pinterest, Neil Haley, and Google Plus, Neil Haley, and on Periscope at Total Tutor. And I'm excited to welcome back for another year. Eric, you took off yesterday. My co-host, Eric Remmel from Life Improvement Radio. Eric, how are you?
Great, Neil. It's great to be here. Appreciate the opportunity again this year. Had a wedding I had to attend to yesterday, so I couldn't get out of, but I'm glad to be here on Sunday and looking forward to all the great interviews.
Absolutely, and we're excited for our first interview, and this is a really interesting one. Eric's really excited about this author, so I'm excited to welcome the program Doug Merlino, author of Beast, Blood, Struggle, and Dreams at the Heart of Mixed Martial Arts, MMA, as we all talk about it. Doug, thanks for calling, and how are you? And welcome to our live broadcast from the Miami Book Fair.
Yeah, thanks, guys. How's it going?
Fantastic. Now, Doug, tell us your background and what makes you, really knowledgeable of MMA. Tell us about that.
I've been a journalist for a long time and wrote a basketball-related book. And I had no knowledge of MMA until 5 years ago. I started watching it and, seeing men fighting in cages. It's a new sport that's come up in really the last 20 years, and I became really intrigued with who are these guys? I mean, where do they come from? How do they get into the sport? How has this become a billion-dollar business? How does this whole thing work? And that's how I started on this book.
Very interesting. It's very interesting to think about that, Doug. And I'm a former professional wrestler, so this is where probably Lisa thought it was a perfect interview for me, because I've wrestled guys in MMA and pro wrestling. I wrestled Dan B. Severin I was still, and I wrestled other guys. Well, we would shoot fight at times. When I was overseas in Germany, if they don't work well, like they weren't selling for me and making me look good in Bremen, Germany, the younger wrestlers from Germany, I'd have to take them down and stretch them and, and tell them, hey, and make it, it was not a work anymore. So a lot of times when I see these guys transition from the WWE back to MMA and back and forth, I'm questioning, is it all legit? And so, what did you see from your research? I know I saw the Ronda Rousey kick, and that looked real for sure. But in pro wrestling, when we hit someone with a chair, we knock them out. It's real barbed wire. So your thought process when you look at how the sport has grown and stuff, and seeing that transition of how a lot of wrestling fans have transitioned over to MMA.
It's a fascinating point. Because there's so much overlap between pro wrestling and MMA among the fans, but there's also certainly being in the MMA and with the whole roots of the sport that came out of, in part, Japanese pro wrestling and the shoot fights. But it's fascinating in the MMA world, because one of the UFC's first mottos was as real as it gets. So, their whole credibility, I think, relies on not having fixed fights. And from what I saw, certainly at, say, the highest levels of UFC or Bellator, the big promotions, the fights weren't fixed. In fact, they go and set up their stars like Ronda Rousey with someone who can beat them, which I don't know what they're feeling about that now, but I don't know if that's good for their bottom line. At the same time, in MMA, there's a lot of crossover. You have guys like Brock Lesnar who come over, going all the way back. But there's also, part of MMA to be, when you get above the small levels, you also have to sell your fights, sell yourself. So there is a big entertainment aspect to it that I think only a small percentage of the fighters really understand. Most of them come from, say, college wrestling backgrounds, and then moving over to that kind of selling your fight, hyping it, working it up is really foreign to them. And those guys, have a hard time. I think the best ones are the guys who can fight well and also talk it up, which is a kind of rare skill set to combine.
Well,
Yeah,
Doug, Eric, you know what I've noticed, Eric, in that whole process is that you're right talking it up, but remember the most popular boxers, Eric Remmel, when boxing was popular, were Muhammad Ali, Eric, and all these different things. And so, Eric, I know I have some interesting questions for you as well, Doug.
Yeah, I was just going to comment on that. I think that's probably a big proponent to any sport, boxing, or any type of, combat-oriented sport is, the person who's the best, the talker and has the biggest game usually, gets further along than any other competitor.
Yeah, and I saw that behind the scenes. One of the fighters that I spent a lot of time with was Daniel Strauss, who's now featherweight champion of Bellator. But Daniel's been really poor at selling his story. He just doesn't like to do it. And there's another fighter, Muhammad Lawal, who's known as King Mo, who was a college wrestler, now an MMA fighter, but he was trying to get into TNA. He was in TNA wrestling, although that didn't go anywhere in the end, I think, because of the promotion. But, behind the scenes, King Mo was telling Daniel, like, look, I've been with these pro wrestlers, man. You got to sell your fight. You got to sell yourself. You got to talk it up. And Daniel's like, well, I don't want to disrespect people. And he's like, come on, man. Would you rather disrespect someone or be broke? And Daniel's like, well, I don't like being broke. So he's like, exactly. Talk it up, talk it up, talk it up. But, for that personality that doesn't like to do that, it gets really hard. But yeah, I mean, that's what people want to see the fights for. They want to see, everyone, not only do they want to see Muhammad Ali fight because he's an amazing fighter, but you either love him or you hate him. So, you get invested emotionally in the guy. And so, yeah, that's such a huge part of the sport that, and what I was surprised is that say the UFC doesn't have they don't train guys in that. Like, you have to figure it out on your own. And the guys that do very well.
Yeah, almost need to be your own press agent, so to speak, I
mean, that's one interesting thing about fighters. One of the interesting things is these guys are complete freelancers. I mean, you have to figure it out on your own and work your way up until you get into the highest ranks, and then maybe, they'll start promoting you. But up until that top 5%, it's all on you.
Well, I was reading a little bit about the biography about your book, and in the breakdown it talks about that you were traveling with the matches and living alongside a lot of these these fighters you've been mentioning for several years. What was that experience like?
Insane. Well, because what people don't get watching this, and I'm sure professional wrestling is the same, is how humdrum most of it is. It's going to wherever you're going, whatever little city, staying in horrible hotels,
you bet.
waiting around a lot, sitting around, watching TV, horrible reality TV for hours and hours on end until the time you fight. And so there's a lot of that. One of the guys, Jeff Monson, is in his 40s now, and he was making a second career in Russia and had become a superstar over there. He's like an anarchist, and he's very outspoken against the U.S., and he's a good fighter, and they loved him. And, over in Russia, MMA is huge. Putin comes to the fights. And so I went from, like, small town Nebraska to going to St. Petersburg, Russia, where 20,000 people were watching the fight. So
wow.
Yeah, it was crazy. It was totally crazy.
That's impressive. And Doug, that's so true, except I guess we were cooler than today's pro wrestlers in MMA. When we would go from town to town, we wouldn't be watching reality television. We'd be partying to 3, 4, 5 o'clock in the morning. The next day, get up at 2 or 3 in the afternoon, and then travel to the next town and wait till our wrestling match happens. So there was a post on Facebook saying today's generation of wrestlers, the groupies in wrestling were called ring rats back when the 80s and 90s and 2000. Now they say these guys are just playing video games.
That's I mean, that's so true. And people always ask me, like, oh, you hung out with I mean, that must have been like you were hanging with the Hells Angels. That's so crazy. Like, you guys must have partied. And I was like, oh man, it was so boring.
Do you have any kind of follow-up books in comparison to this? Now that you've traveled with a lot of these folks for a couple of years and written the books, do you have anything you're thinking about planning in the future after this?
Oh, geez. I am planning I'm taking it easy. It was a lot. working more normal work, and yeah, I mean that lifestyle, I loved it. It was 2 years. I spent 2 years with these guys, but I also realized like it takes a lot out of you. It's a showbiz life, and it was a lot, you know. And especially, I got to know the coaches very well because we were more of the same age, and you know the coaches are like them because I was following several fighters. You're on the road all the time and going through all that. It's exhausting. So I actually came away with a huge amount of respect for these guys who coach for. They don't get paid very much, and really are doing it out of passion, you know. But it's a lot. It takes a toll.
So, Doug, it seems like the same ways you talked about professional wrestling, only a certain few guys make a lot of money in the sport, and the rest make nothing hardly. And then what we're seeing in pro wrestling today is that if you're not in the WWE and you wrestled for TNA or you wrestled for back in the day ECW, you made no money. You're just excited to be on television. You've seen the same thing going to these gyms where they trained in, where guys were dreaming to just be on a UFC stage one day, or just be on an MMA stage with a big crowd when they were fighting in front of 400 people, and pretty much it's backwoods in so many aspects. So the thing is that why would people put their life in danger so much if this is real? I continue to say I think it's a work, but it's really, really stiffer than wrestling, maybe like Japanese-style wrestling. And Doug, you'll disagree with me, but that's fine. If you do, that I think that it's predetermined, but probably it's really, really stiff and really hurt. They're putting themselves in so much danger in the early stages of their career, and they're not making any money. So they're going to see worse effects than the pro wrestlers did that died early of brain disease, brain injuries and stuff. Right or wrong?
Yeah, well, I think one interesting. I mean, I've been everywhere from the smallest levels to the big fights in Vegas, but at the lower levels, the violence can be much more extreme because you have so many mismatches in training, and I think the promoters even like to set up some mismatches because then you get very quickly, and fights ended very quickly with KOs and violent finishes, which people like to see. But I found, like, you know, going to these small shows in backwoods Florida that I've been to, that a couple hundred people are there, and you go backstage, and, you know, there's these guys there, and they introduce you, you know, someone introduces you, is like, you know, this guy, Doug, he's writing a book, so everyone wants to talk to you, and they're like, well, you need to follow me because I'm going to be UFC champion. But they say it, like every fighter, you know, says that with such a amazing degree of conviction, and you're like, man, you know, I respect that, but let's look at the surroundings. Like, it's probably not going to happen. Like, this is not going to be the launch pad for you. But you know, you talk to all these guys, and everyone has a dream of being the George St. Pierre or the Ronda Rousey or Conor McGregor, and I think that fuels a lot of people. The reality is, even in the highest levels of UFC, it's 20 or 30 guys who get a pay-per-view cut, and they make a lot of money. And even very well-known household name fighters, if you are not the type of fighter who can convince someone to shell out $50 to watch you, you're not making very much money. I mean, you know, even if all the fans know you, and you know, it's only that. What do you want to say? Top 3%.
I'm saying, what do you think the statistics are in that? You think it's like maybe 1 out of every 1,000 fighters, or what do you think? How many actually achieve that level?
God, I've wondered that myself, like to put a number on it, because there's so many fighters, and you know, I spent most of my time at American Top Team, which is down here in South Florida, which is a huge gym, one of the best in the world. Dozens and dozens and dozens of fighters, and even there, only small percentage of these guys are making it to the top. Out of 60, 70, 80 guys in there, there's like 5 who are really at the top. And then you go to every MMA gym in every strip mall in America, and how many people are it? Tens of thousands.
Yeah.
So
I think it's even bigger than that, honestly. I think people have transitioned over and don't want to be pro wrestlers anymore. They want to be MMA fighters, and that everyone loves fighting. and especially if they can do it and not go to jail for it, they're more likely to do this, and they see this as the best way to impress girls and impress themselves with their love for just violence. And the more these guys, how many of them do you think are on anabolic steroids or some performance-enhancing drugs? I know they test in the top leagues, but what about in, let's say, the lower leagues as they move their way up?
I mean, I think performance-enhancing drugs are widespread. There's no doubt. At the UFC level, oddly, in the last year, they've instituted random testing and they've actually instituted a really rigid drug testing program that I know from people inside the sport that is actually for serious to clean up the sport. I mean, but then you have all these other, it's like any other thing, any other gym thing where I think, there's the guy who has the anabolics and you want to try this or not. I mean, not only that, but there's all the stuff you can get now legally, testosterone, human growth. I mean, it's not even illegal. It's illegal in the sport, but you can just go into what are these things, anti-aging center and pick up whatever you want. As any of us who work out at a regular gym see from probably the people around us. So I mean, I think that's widespread and probably will have long-term health effects for some people. But I don't know.
Do you think the sport's still kind of in a wild, wild west phase? I remember years ago when MMA just popped up and, cage fighting had come through and everybody was kind of giving it a lot of grief saying, oh, this is too violent, it's too bloody, it'll never go anywhere. And we've seen this huge, maturation of the sport, it's already done a 360 in growth and profit margins and regulation, but I still think they probably got a lot of room to go.
Yeah, I mean, I think at the low levels, it's total Wild West and will probably remain so. At the level of the UFC, now that it's showing across Fox Sports, I think they're at the level of cleaning it up, really trying to make it as respectable as they can. And I don't know, maybe at some point the current owners sell it, it becomes a corporate-owned property. I don't know. So I think it's going two ways. I think at the high level it's getting sanitized a bit, and at the low levels, I mean, I know from going to all these low-level fights, it's definitely Wild West. I mean, you got fights in the backwoods that are supposedly regulated by the state commissions, but
those state commissions are interesting because we had to get licenses as well, Doug. So where's the best place we can find information on you and purchase your book and learn more about you, Doug? I just followed you on Twitter. We'll definitely try to stay in touch and stuff, and I'll tweet you out when it goes out in the syndication. But where's the best place we can find information and learn more about you?
Yeah, my website, DougMerlino.net.
All right, Doug. Fantastic. Thanks for coming on the show, and we'll talk soon, okay?
Great. Yeah, thank you, Neil. Thanks, Eric.
Thanks.
All right,
Have a great day.
All right. You're listening to the Total Education Network, powered by Life Improvement Radio, live from the Miami Book Fair. We'll be back in just a moment.
Thank you for listening to Life Improvement Radio. The views expressed by show hosts or their guests are their own and shall not be construed in any way as advice from Life Improvement Radio. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our website. Personal perspectives expressed by the producers, writers, or editors will always be presented as such. Any rebroadcast or retransmission without the expressed written consent of Life Improvement Radio is strictly prohibited. Thanks for listening.